Let's start with the SCO summit. We had a lot of news coming out of the SCO summit, but in your opinion, what were the most important things, the most important highlights of this summit?
I think that the most important thing to appreciate about the summit is the broader context of what this represents. So, they signed a declaration document, which is a very important document. They adopted about 25 strategic documents defining development over the coming, I think, through 2035, things like energy, agriculture, trade, security, even things like sanitation and providing clean water. But I think that the more important thing to appreciate about this is that I think it possibly represents an inflection point in human history. And I'll try to explain why by kind of trying to summarize the context of this. So if we go back 200 years, we had the British Empire, right? And the British Empire was really keen on controlling the Eurasian landmass, not because they wanted to bring them freedom and democracy, but because of the resources and the labor force. It's where most of the human population is, and energy resources, mineral resources, and so forth. And and then this strategy of dominating the Eurasian landmass was finally formulated by Halford Mackinder, right? And so we know how important this has been to the British Empire. But when the British Empire seemingly collapsed, the vested interest behind the British Empire simply transferred the seat of power to Washington, D.C. So I think that the spiritual, philosophical, even strategic mothership is still the city of London, but the muscle, the political, economic, diplomatic, and military muscle had to be a fresh one. So they chose the United States. And so the strategy of maintaining the hegemony over the Eurasian landmass simply was transferred from British Empire to the United States. And since then, this has been explicitly acknowledged as the #1 priority of the U.S. foreign policy. We had writings of Zbigniew Brzezinski, which essentially reformulate the very same strategy that Halford Mackinder had formulated maybe 70 years before that. But we also had in 2019 one Wes Mitchell, who was a Deputy Secretary of State under Trump, who gave a presentation to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and who said that maintaining the hegemony over the Eurasian landmass was the #1 priority for the administration, and that they were cooperating very closely with, what he called our ally, the United Kingdom. And now, what does that mean in practice? Okay, so let's go back to what happened when Soviet Union collapsed. So they knew that there was a great resource wealth around the Caspian Sea region. And as soon as the Soviet Union collapsed, Dick Cheney's Halliburton sent people there to survey the area. And they decided that, wow, this is huge. This is a second Saudi Arabia. And so Western oil companies, financed by Western banking institutions, went there to develop this. And they wanted to create their own a pipeline over to export this oil to Western markets. And that pipeline had to go through the territories controlled by the Western powers, which was Azerbaijan, Georgia, Turkey. So it was the Baku, Tbilisi, Ceyhan pipeline. And the only other pipeline, which was a competitor and which was a problem for them, was the pipeline that went from Baku to Novorossiysk across Chechnya and Dagestan. Now you see where this is going. Remember, there was huge wars in Chechnya and Dagestan at the turn of this century, in the late 90s, and well, it kind of ended by 2000. It started, I think, in 1991 or two, and in two phases. Major combat operations ended around 2000. But how did this happen? So the foreign oil companies moved in, and the BP and Amoco created like a local oil company in Azerbaijan. It was called AYOK, like Azerbaijan International Operating Company. And then there was also Mega Oil. Mega Oil was set up by a man named Richard Secord. He was a U.S. general, a veteran of CIA dirty tricks. He ran drug operations in Laos. And then there was also, Bush 41 with his friend Turki Al-Faisal, who was head of the Saudi intelligence. And then Turki Al-Faisal's best friend forever was Osama bin Laden. So Richard Secord landed in Baku in 1991, and he set up Mega Oil, and he also set up an airline. And this airline was transporting mujahideen from Afghanistan, where they were recruited by Osama bin Laden, and they were brought to Baku. And then from there, they were farmed out to Chechnya and to Dagestan, along with a lot of CIA money. And to make sure that Azerbaijan stayed within control of the United States, in October 1993, they had a coup, and they removed the democratically elected president, and they installed Haydar Aliyev. And since then, they kind of moved into Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan to control the oil pipelines, and at the same time, they farmed out these mujahideen, and this was a CIA strategy to finance the separatist movements in the Russia's southern underbelly, meaning Chechnya, Dagestan, but also Georgia and Ukraine and Transnistria, Moldova. They've been perpetually rigging the region for demolition, so that they could at will trigger crises with which to draw Russia into these quagmire conflict that would ultimately weaken and destroy Russia, so that they could ultimately dismember it. Well, okay, so one of the documents that was signed that was adopted at the SCO summit at Astana a week ago was a document about security, which explicitly mentions terrorism and separatism and extremism as something that they are now preparing to fight in very concrete way. So the SCO, which was founded in early 2000s, I think 2001, as a security organization, is now actually adding teeth to their push against the Western destabilization efforts, because all of these things that we've seen happening in Georgia, in Ukraine, in Chechnya, in Dagestan, in Armenia, the coups in Azerbaijan, in Kazakhstan, in this whole region of Central Asia, they have all been financed by the CIA, orchestrated by Western intelligence agencies. Primarily, we're talking always about the usual suspects: MI6, CIA, and the Mossad, but then also other Western agencies or ones that were loyal to the Western system of power. So we're talking about Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Turkey. However, over the last 30 years, this has changed a lot. And now we saw Erdogan in Astana with the other heads of state discussing a completely new security architecture. So I think that what we're looking at is a decisive preparation to take on these Western efforts to destabilize the region, to create a mutual security network. They have also asserted, the indivisibility of security, and also the principle that one nation's security cannot come at the expense of another nation. And they're taking on terrorism, they're taking on separatism, and they're taking on extremism, which are the three, isms that the Western powers have consistently used to destabilize the region. And destabilize why? To install their puppet rulers and to be able to get their corporations to develop the natural resources of this region, and they're, the Western banks ultimately who would be funding this development. So I think that the summit in Astana now, the 3rd and 4th July of this year, is perhaps an inflection point where these 10 major Eurasian powers are saying, stop, enough, now we're pushing back, and we're pushing back with very concrete, specific measures. And so I think Western powers are put on the back foot. We see that possibly Azerbaijan is going to become a member of the SCO. We see that Turkey is possibly going to become a member of SCO. Iran, which has been the target of Western destabilization effort, is now a member of SCO. India and Pakistan were there, and India and Pakistan was one of the, crisis flashpoints that were always kind of entertained as one of the destabilization regions there. And so I think North Korea is missing, but who knows? Maybe in the near future we might see North Korea also become part of the SCO, and at that point, I think you get something of a citadel. You get something of a fortress, Eurasia, which is going to be off limits to the Western powers, and that means ultimately that Western corporations are going to lose control of the area, that the Western financial institutions will lose control of the collateral, and that in the end means the collapse of the Western financial system. And our financial system is the mechanism of control of the world that has been used throughout the colonialist period for the past 200 to 300 years. And so I think it's a complete departure from history as we've known it for the last 2 or 3 centuries, but longer still if you look at the older versions of Western colonial system. You can go back to the Venetian Empire in the 11th and 12th centuries. It's essentially the same thing. It's only kind of metastasized and grown since that time. And now I think it has hit a brick wall. That's what the SCO summit was. And I think that this is why the Western press is ignoring it, because it is such a problem for the Western world that they would rather prefer that it didn't happen.
Yeah. The other thing that was so important for BRICS and for the SCO summit, it was India and China deciding to talk about their differences. I think this is huge. This is huge when
Yes.
it comes to the BRICS.
Yes, it is. It is absolutely huge because India has been, alongside Kazakhstan, one of the countries that the West was hoping they could bring back into their orbit. And look at what happened. Modi won his re-election, and the first trip he takes is to Moscow. That's a huge statement. His foreign minister was at the SCO summit, so he was among the heads of state who adopted all these documents and this how do you call it, declaration. And so I think that the farther the Western desperation goes, and the more the facade is starting to fall away, that this is nothing to do with freedom, democracy, human rights. This is purely an agenda to rule the world, to control the resources, and to turn all the wealth in the world into financial flows in the Western financial system, and that the way they're trying to protect this hegemony is extremely ugly and extremely dirty. The more the other side is saying, we have to cooperate, we have to resolve our differences, we have to find a way to work together with each other, how do you call it, ensure our mutual security, and simply leave the West behind, which is quite amazing, because not so long ago, everybody was checking with Washington and London. Everybody, nobody dared pretty much to discuss any alliances, any mutual security things. Everything went through Washington, everything went through London, G7 and so forth. Europeans were involved with practically everything. And now this is already behind us. This is quite a change in history.
Bloomberg reported that Saudi Arabia has hinted to the European Union that it will sell Western bonds if G7 countries confiscate $300 billion in Russian assets. This is just the way that the things that are happening right now, it's unbelievable.
Yes.
And we were thinking of Saudi Arabia, how the United States can pressure them in order to bring them to their circle of power. It doesn't seem that it's working for the United States.
No, it doesn't seem, well, if you look at the day-to-day events, it's very hard to tell. But if you rewind the clock to the year 2000, you can see it, because in 2000, 2001, they all these neocons created the project for the new American century, and they had this very grandiose agenda and the plan to assert what they call the full spectrum dominance, that they would eliminate any nation that dared to to jeopardize their hegemony over the whole world. And they felt so they were so self-confident, they were so self-assured that this is the history that they are creating. Remember Karl Rove was saying to people, well, we are the people who create history. You all might study what we do, you might research and interpret what we do, but by the time you figure it out, we have already created new facts on the ground. And then there was a Pentagon general who said, I forget his name, but it's a known quote, who said that the United States should every so often they should take some shitty little country and throw it against the wall, just so everybody else understands that we mean business. And today, look where they are. They cannot stop Houthis. They cannot assure freedom of navigation through the Red Sea and through the Suez Canal. They have this big prosperity guardian thing for the last 5 months, 6 months, I don't remember how long. And they are, last we saw aircraft carrier General Eisenhower had to hightail it from the Red Sea because apparently the Houthis hit it. They won't admit that it hit it, but we know that they just turned around and left the area. And now we also have rumors that the Russians are providing high precision hypersonic missiles to the Houthis. So it's just getting worse and worse. And I don't see any good news. you know, the whole administration in disarray. Joe Biden doesn't know where he is. Their Secretary of State is the most incompetent Secretary of State probably in history of the United States, at least in the living memory. Um, they're raking up debts, $1 trillion every 100 days. The interest rate on those debts are going up. We just had since 2020 until last year, we had the largest bear market in US Treasury bonds on record, meaning going back 300 and almost 350 years. So I don't see where the good news is coming from. But like if you look at the trend over the last 20 years from, we're going to have a full spectrum dominance over the whole world to where they are today, you can see that the trend is definitely that the Western Empire is on the retreat, that they're getting defeated in one theater after another. Remember, they were supposed to take control of Syria. Didn't happen. They were supposed to hold on to Afghanistan. Didn't happen. They were supposed to take control of Ukraine. They're losing that one. They were supposed to break regime change Russia and have partition it. That's not happening. They were supposed to regime change Belarus, Kazakhstan. They were supposed to regime change Turkey. None of it happened. And so not to mention that, now Saudi Arabia is in the BRICS, that they are turning towards Russia and China. I think it's very natural for the Saudis to warn the Europeans because I don't know what exactly the sum is, but last I checked, it was close to $800 billion is what the Saudis have sitting with the Federal Reserve. And I don't know how much they have sitting in European banks. But, obviously they're nervous because if they take money from the Russians, then that sets a precedent. That means that they are so desperate that they're going into clearly illegal action. And, once you've gone into piracy, then, what's to keep you from doing it to the next enemy, the next largest pot of money, so, then comes, so the Saudis are clearly nervous about it and with a good reason. And I think that it's getting uglier and uglier, but this is, everybody in the world is paying attention to this. And even though in the West they're selling us narratives, they're always trying to work the situation so that they could create a narrative that they could sell to the public, and then the public will think like, well, I guess that's reasonable, let's go bomb the next country. But in the rest of the world, they're looking at this and they're thinking these people are completely insane. We have to protect ourselves from them, and we have to push them away from our business. And so that's happening, and I think it's gathering pace.
Stoltenberg, in his recent interview, was talking about he's trying to shift the conflict from Russia to China right now. He says that the reason that Russia is getting stronger and can continue this conflict in Ukraine is because of China. That's why we are inviting Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, and Japan to the summit, to the summit that is going on right now, NATO summit. And at the same time, we have a new report that shows China supplies 40% of all semiconductors needed for the production of key weapon system in the United States defense industry. It's unbelievable. They want to pick a fight with China. At the same time, China is providing them with semiconductors that can be used for their weapons.
Yes, and it's not only that they're providing 40% of these components. It's not like then the 60% of things function. It's all of these advanced things. Like if you don't get the right component, the whole thing, you can't produce the whole thing. And they already have largely disarmed themselves, and they have major problems procuring sufficient components to produce replacements. Starting with simple 152 millimeter 152 millimeter grenades for their howitzers and cannons. But then not to mention all these things that go, the tomahawks, the missiles that go into their useless Patriot air defense systems. They're running short of everything. Their production is backlogged years behind schedule, and they have major issues ramping up the productions because it's all privately owned, and it's all profit driven, which means that these private companies, they do not maintain idle production facilities in order to be able to rapidly operationalize them and to increase the production of ammunitions and new weapon systems. And not only that, but then they don't systematically form their qualified technicians. So when they need qualified technicians, they're short. They can't come up with them. And so what do? Then you have to, you can't compete. So you have to go and kill. You have to go kill China. It's how do you call it? It's if you can't prevail in honest competition, then you have to go kill your competitor. That's something I think particularly Western as a principle. But that's apparently what they're doing. But I don't know where this is coming from, because obviously Stoltenberg is not the man who decides these things. He's just an empty suits that speaks what they put on his memo. But the decisions are coming from somewhere. So okay, the Pentagon, the probably more Department of Defense, and the Treasury and the National Security Agency. But who is telling them these things? Because at the Department of Defense and at the Pentagon, they know that they don't stand a chance against China. So who's saying, yeah, well, let's go take on China anyway. Let's, we'll get it started and we'll fight until the last Filipino, until the last Japanese, until the last South Korean and Singaporean and Australian and so forth. But they're going to lose anyway. They're not going to win that war. And I kind of expect that this is going to cause further rift in these alliances, because the Japanese are not keen on fighting China. Neither are the South Koreans, neither are the Australians. The only ones that seem kind of, on a scale of 1 to 10, they seem kind of 6 are Singapore and the Filipinos. But I don't know how far that goes either. That could easily falter as well. So it seems, if you're rushing headlong into a predictable defeat, there has got to be a very high degree of desperation that's pushing you there. And then, you have people in the network, in the system of power, like the U.S. generals and the Secretary of State and the NATO General Secretary, who'll just go like, yeah, okay, this is what we're doing because this is what we're told to do. But I think it's a pose. I think they're maybe trying to provoke a reaction from the others. I'm not sure, but they already lost, and they know it. But it seems to me that they can't admit it, so it's easier to stay with the delusion. And it seems that they can't afford to lose face. So they're pretending that they're in the position of strength. They're pretending that they can take on these new emerging powers, that they're still, the sheriff in town. But it's all going nowhere, and we're only digging ourselves deeper. I think that for the sake of the populations in the Western world, they should say, stop, okay, this is not a good idea. We have to treat these countries as equal partners with respect. We have to take their security concerns into account, and we have to make equitable deals as good neighbors and partners. But it seems that this is not even in the Western power structure's DNA to even think like that. So all they can think of is sanctions, war, bombs, in attacks, sending airstrike carrier groups to intimidate them. And that's about it. And so I think that this is what they're doing again, but it's less and less impressive with every passing day.
Yeah. With the current changes politically in the European Union, do you see that we're getting to that point that we see some sort of wisdom in their policy, as we saw between Russia and Turkey? We saw that Russia totally understands what Turkey was doing in helping Ukraine, sending drones to Ukraine. When it comes to Europe and the European Union, as you mentioned in the SCO summit, we saw all of them together. China, India, even Saudi Arabia, coming
Yeah.
Iran. It's unbelievable how they're fighting for a greater good for all of them. And here comes the question, when that moment comes to Europe and their decision-making center.
This is all kind of under the surface. If you read the press, it's, oh, elections for the European Parliament, far right is emerging. Oh, French election, far right. Oh, German, the far right is rising. So everywhere they're saying like the far right is rising, and it will take Ursula von der Leyen to push back against this or something. It doesn't make any sense at all. Look, I know an acquaintance of mine who is close to French military circles, and she told me that they, meaning the people who are in the French military, fully expect that the current crisis will unravel through a civil war. So that's what they expect. I also last week spoke with a friend in Germany who is close to the top of the AfD party, and he said to me that they're practically facing a Gestapo, that the situation is extraordinarily tense, that the courts, the police, the security services, and the media are all working in concert, that their crackdown against dissidents is absolutely scandalous, and that's his word, and that people that they target, they basically devastate their lives. And we saw with these elections in France that the ruling establishment is not going to give up. They're not going to bend, and if they don't bend, then there's a risk that something will break. And in France we had this surprise win by the left coalition and their man Jean-Luc Mélenchon. I don't know if this is a genuine result or if it's another, how do you call it, rigged election. But even in the best case scenario, it was a last minute manipulation to put all these left parties into a big coalition, and then they had a shock win, which quote unquote surprised all the polling agencies. Well, I don't know, I'm not convinced, but they tried to prevent Le Pen and her Rassemblement National, and instead they got the left wing on steroids. Okay. And I saw one financial analyst, Daniel Lacalle, who commented it on Twitter. It was funny. He said that France was choosing between debt, more debt, or way more debt, and way more debt prevailed. Well, that's actually a good point, because who's going to pay back all this debt? France is already bankrupt. European Union is already bankrupt. We're using the euro, so what I predicted some time ago is that we'll have the unraveling like in the Soviet Union, because when the Soviet Union fell apart, they still kept, for another year, they kept the same currency. Okay, so Russia and Kazakhstan and Belarus and Ukraine, they were all using the same currencies. but now suddenly each country had a different central bank. So what was happening is that every central bank of these Soviet republics was trying to export inflation to one another by printing excessive amounts of rubles for their own use, for the use of their government and their state. And so what that means that when the price controls were removed abruptly at the beginning of 1992, then from one day to the next, inflation exploded 500%. And so now again, we have like the ECB, we have the single currency in Europe, but you have individual central banks like the German and the French and the Italian central bank who are printing the euros for their own use themselves. And so what if one day they decide like we need more euros and we're not going to wait for ECB to give us the green light, we're just going to do it. Then you're going to have again individual countries of the EU exporting inflation to one another. And what happened in France could be the step in that direction, because these leftists are going to say, no, we need, state to intervene. We need to increase pensions. We need to increase the minimum wage. The state has to create more jobs and blah, blah, blah. And of course, you need money for all that. So they're going to say, well, Macron and Sarkozy's government created this mess. We're going to fix it, but we need more euros. And the result might be, I would say the result will inevitably be the collapse of the euro, the collapse of the sovereign bonds of the European nations. Interest rates are going to explode and inflation is going to explode, which means essentially a total societal collapse. So what happened in the Soviet Union in the early 1990s is the future we are very likely looking at in the European Union.
Yeah. Just to wrap up this session, Alex, and how do you see right now the situation in Ukraine? We've learned that Zelensky was talking about that he's willing to have a second peace summit and having Russians to participate in this summit. This is important. On the other hand, we have Orban doing his best in order to bring some sort of sanity to what's going on in Ukraine. But at the end of the day, how do you see it right now?
I don't know how to explain this, Nima. One possible explanation is that he ran out of cocaine and started thinking with his own brain. That's one possibility. I think that what happened was extremely remarkable because suddenly he's suggesting things that until a few days ago were absolutely not on the table. So he's saying we need another peace summit. He's saying that Russia should be present at that summit, which he was absolutely refusing until now. He's even open to making territorial concessions, to recognize the facts on the ground and to say like, all right, so we're not getting back Crimea, we're not getting back the Donbas, but please stop kicking our butts, This is almost like a different Zelensky, and I'm scratching my head over this one. So if it isn't he changed his drug dealer, I think that there's a possibility that, because if you will recall, I think that in the late 2022 or at some point in 2023, we had a Chinese delegation that went to Ukraine and that met with Zelensky and with his government officials, and they were proposing him a peace deal. That was rejected because obviously the Western puppeteers said no way, we're not doing that. Fight till the last Ukrainian. But the Chinese, I believe, stayed in contact, and it may just be that that Zelensky has looked at the Chinese peace plan, and that now, given the circumstances, it is a lot more attractive. And I don't know how to explain that Zelensky was even allowed to say this, because his entourage, his security detail are all, my understanding, British SAS. So the information flow is controlled. What he's allowed to say and not say is controlled. Everything is controlled. He's merely the puppet. How this happened, I cannot explain, Nima, but I suspect that there's a Chinese role there. And I think that maybe we'll find out over the coming weeks, but I don't have a good explanation at the moment.